For decades, the Hornet, from the first sting in '95 to the shockwave of '23, securing the skies with the lethal kill to the absolute Red Sea Fury today.
In 1991, an aircraft nobody trusted launched off a carrier deck into a war zone, and within hours, it had silenced every critic alive. The FA-18 Super Hornet was not supposed to win. It was a compromise aircraft, born from budget fights, political horse trading, and a design philosophy that said one jet could do everything. Fighters should fight. Bombers should bomb. That was the old doctrine. Boeing said no. One airframe, one crew, every mission. From enforcing no-fly zones over the burning oil fields of Iraq, to dropping precision munitions on insurgent tunnels in Afghanistan, to shooting down a Syrian fighter jet in the skies over Raqqa. This machine has done what no other tactical aircraft in history has managed. It has fought in every major American conflict for over 3 decades without a single air-to-air loss. This is every mission of the FA-18 Super Hornet. The year was 1995. Saddam Hussein's forces were pressing against the Kurds in northern Iraq, violating the no-fly zone that coalition forces had established after the Gulf War. American carriers in the Persian Gulf rotated squadrons in and out on grueling 6-month deployments, and the jets patrolling those skies were aging. The F-14 Tomcat was a Cold War interceptor, fast, iconic, but thirsty for fuel and expensive to maintain. The Navy needed something newer. The FA-18E and F models represented a near-complete redesign of the original Hornet airframe. The fuselage was stretched by over 30 inches. Wing area increased by 25%. New intake geometry reduced radar cross-section. 2 additional weapon stations were added, bringing the total to 11. Internal fuel capacity jumped by 33%, addressing the original Hornet's most crippling limitation, range. The Super Hornet's first operational deployment came aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln in 2002, but its lineage traced back to proving flights over southern Iraq during Operation Southern Watch. Navy test pilots pushed the jet through combat air patrol profiles over the exclusion zone, validating its radar, its sensors, and its ability to transition from air-to-air scanning to ground attack targeting in a single sortie. The APG-79 radar painted contacts at ranges the legacy Hornet could never reach. Crews reported the jet felt like a different animal entirely. The FA-18 Super Hornet's core architecture centers on 5 integrated systems. First, the APG-79 multi-mode radar, capable of tracking while scanning across multiple target sets simultaneously. Second, the twin F414 GE 400 engines, each producing 22,000 pounds of thrust. Third, an 11-station weapons bus supporting a mix of air-to-air and air-to-ground ordnance. Fourth, a reduced radar cross-section achieved through inlet masking, aligned edges, and radar-absorbent materials. Fifth, the ALR-67 electronic warfare suite for self-protection and threat detection. On those patrols, the Super Hornet proved what Boeing had promised. A single jet could sweep the airspace, identify hostile radar emissions, jam them, then roll in on a surface target, all without handing off to another aircraft. The age of the multi-role fighter had arrived, and the Super Hornet was its living proof. But patrolling a no-fly zone was just the warm-up. September 11th changed everything. Within weeks, American carriers surged toward the Arabian Sea. The USS Theodore Roosevelt and the USS Carl Vinson positioned themselves south of Pakistan. Their air wings began launching strikes into Afghanistan under Operation Enduring Freedom. The problem was distance. Afghanistan is landlocked. The nearest carrier station was over 600 nautical miles from the target areas in the Tora Bora Mountains and Kandahar. The Legacy Hornet could not make that trip without tanking 3 times each way. The Super Hornet, with its enlarged fuel fraction, cut that to 2. More importantly, it could carry a meaningful weapons load to the target and still have enough gas to loiter. Loitering mattered because the ground war in Afghanistan was not a conventional fight. Special forces teams on horseback were calling in airstrikes against cave complexes and Taliban convoys, and the jets overhead needed to wait, sometimes for hours, until a target materialized. Close air support in mountainous terrain requires precise coordination between ground controllers and aircraft. The jet must maintain visual or sensor contact with friendly forces while identifying hostile positions that may be separated by as little as 200 meters. GPS-guided munitions like the Joint Direct Attack Munition reduce the risk of friendly fire by enabling all-weather precision strikes. But the pilot still needed to verify target coordinates against terrain features in real time. Super Hornet crews flew marathon sorties lasting 7 to 8 hours with multiple aerial refueling cycles. They dropped JDAM bombs on cave entrances in the White Mountains. They strafed Taliban positions with the M61 Vulcan cannon during troops in contact situations. One crew from VFA-143 recorded dropping 6 separate weapons on 6 separate targets in a single sortie, a feat that would have required 3 Legacy Hornets. The tanking problem alone would have grounded lesser aircraft. Navy Ka-6D tankers operated from the same carriers, but their fuel offload was limited. Super Hornet crews developed a technique called buddy tanking. One Super Hornet would carry an external refueling store on its centerline station and top off its wingman mid-mission. This allowed strike pairs to extend their time on station by 90 minutes without relying on dedicated tanker support. It was an improvised solution to an impossible geometry problem, and it worked. The mountains of Afghanistan were unforgiving. High altitude reduced engine performance. Thin air degraded bomb ballistics. Thus storms blinded sensors. During one mission over the Shah-i-Kot Valley in Operation Anaconda, a Super Hornet crew received an emergency close air support call from soldiers pinned down by machine gun fire on a ridgeline. The pilot descended below the mountain peaks, acquired the target through the ATFLIR pod, and dropped a single GBU-12 paveway directly onto the enemy position. The ground commander reported the threat neutralized within seconds. The Super Hornet absorbed every punishment and kept flying. And when the focus shifted from mountains to cities, the jet followed. March 20, 2003. Operation Iraqi Freedom began with a decapitation strike. Intelligence suggested Saddam Hussein was sheltering at the Dora Farms complex south of Baghdad. The order came down, hit it now. Super Hornets from the USS Abraham Lincoln were among the first aircraft to cross the Iraqi border. The opening night of the Iraq invasion was the most complex air campaign since Desert Storm. Over 1,000 sorties launched in the first 48 hours. Super Hornets operated in mixed strike packages alongside F-14 Tomcats, EA-6B Prowlers, and Tomahawk cruise missiles. Their role was dual: sweep the airspace for any Iraqi fighters bold enough to scramble, then transition to ground attack and hit surface-to-air missile sites, command bunkers, and communications nodes. The shock and awe doctrine relied on overwhelming simultaneous strikes against hundreds of targets to paralyze Iraqi command and control. Unlike Desert Storm's methodical week-long air campaign, Iraqi Freedom compressed the timeline. Aircraft needed to strike, rearm, and launch again within hours. The Super Hornet's reliability and fast turnaround time made it the workhorse of carrier-based operations during this phase. One particular sortie from VFA-115 illustrates the jet's versatility. The crew launched configured for air superiority with AIM-120 AMRAAM and AIM and AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles. En route to their combat air patrol station, they received a retasking order. The Republican Guard column was moving south toward Nasiriyah. The crew dumped their air-to-air profile, switched the APG-79 to ground mapping mode, identified the convoy, and dropped 2 GBU-38 JDAMs onto the lead vehicles, stopping the column dead. They then returned to their patrol station and resumed scanning for aerial threats. 2 missions in one sortie. No other aircraft in the battle group could have done both. The speed of the campaign stunned observers. In Desert Storm, the air war had lasted 39 days before ground forces moved. In Iraqi Freedom, air and ground operations launched simultaneously. Super Hornets were flying close air support for advancing Marines within the first 24 hours, a role that demanded instant target identification and near-zero margin for error in a battle space crowded with friendly forces. As Baghdad fell, the Super Hornet's reputation hardened. It was no longer the compromised jet. It was the most versatile tactical aircraft in the fleet. But the hardest missions were still ahead. By 2005, Iraq had become an insurgency. The conventional war was over, but the killing was not. Improvised explosive devices lined every road. Sniper teams operated from residential rooftops. And American ground forces needed eyes in the sky, constantly. The Super Hornet adapted. Crews that had trained for fleet air defense and deep strike found themselves flying low and slow over Iraqi cities, scanning for IED emplacements with the ATFLIR targeting pod. The advanced targeting forward-looking infrared system gave the Super Hornet a persistent surveillance capability that rivaled dedicated reconnaissance platforms. The ATFLIR pod provides high-resolution infrared imagery with enough detail to identify individuals and track vehicle movements from medium altitude. When paired with the APG-79 radar in synthetic aperture mode, the Super Hornet can create detailed ground maps that reveal disturbed Earth. hidden cache sites, and patterns of activity invisible to the naked eye. This dual-sensor approach transformed a strike fighter into an intelligence platform. Night after night, Super Hornets orbited over Fallujah, Ramadi, and Tikrit. They provided overwatch for Marine patrols. They tracked insurgent vehicles moving weapons between safe houses. When a ground commander called for fire, the response time was measured in seconds. The jet was already overhead, already tracking, already locked. One crew from VFA-213 spent 9 consecutive hours over Ramadi during the Second Battle of Fallujah in November 2004. They expended every weapon on board, 4 GBU-12 paveway laser-guided bombs and 500 rounds of 20mm cannon ammunition. When they were empty, they stayed on station for another 90 minutes, using the ATFLIR to call out enemy positions to other aircraft. The insurgency forged the Super Hornet into something its designers never anticipated, a persistent urban warfare platform. And the lessons learned over Iraq would prove critical when a new enemy emerged. In March 2011, Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi turned his military against his own people. The United Nations authorized military intervention. Operation Odyssey Dawn, launched with Tomahawk cruise missile strikes, followed immediately by manned aircraft. Super Hornets from the USS Enterprise were among the first jets over Libyan airspace. The mission profile was suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD. Libya operated a layered air defense network built around Russian-made SA-5, SA-6, and SA-8 surface-to-air missile systems. Before any strike aircraft could operate safely, those systems had to be destroyed. Super Hornets carried the AGM-80 HARM high-speed anti-radiation missile designed to home in on enemy radar emissions. The tactic was brutally simple. Fly toward the threat. Wait for the enemy radar to illuminate. Fire the HARM. The missile rides the radar beam straight to its source. When the radar dies, the missile battery goes blind. Suppression of enemy air defenses is one of the most dangerous mission sets in tactical aviation. The jet must deliberately expose itself to hostile radar to provoke a response, then destroy the threat before it can launch. Timing is measured in single-digit seconds. The electronic warfare suite must identify, classify, and geolocate the threat radar while the pilot maneuvers to optimize the HARM's engagement geometry. Miscalculation means flying into the missile envelope without a shot. Over 3 nights, Super Hornet crews systematically dismantled Libya's coastal air defenses. They fired HARM missiles at radar installations near Tripoli, Misrata, and Benghazi. They dropped JDAM bombs on command bunkers. And when the air defenses went silent, they shifted to close air support for rebel forces on the ground. The Libya campaign demonstrated something important. The Super Hornet could fight its way into defended airspace, destroy the defenses, and immediately transition to a completely different mission, all on the same fuel load. No aircraft swap. No rearming pit stop. One jet, start to finish. The next war would demand even more. June 2014. The Islamic State seized Mosul. Within weeks, they controlled territory the size of Great Britain. The Iraqi military collapsed, and American carriers repositioned into the Persian Gulf. Operation Inherent Resolve began on August 8, 2014, when 2 Super Hornets from the USS George H.W. Bush dropped 500-pound laser-guided bombs on an Islamic State artillery position that was firing on Kurdish forces near Erbil. Those were the first American bombs dropped on Iraq since the withdrawal in 2011. The air campaign against the Islamic State would last over 4 years and become the longest sustained carrier-based combat operation since Vietnam. Super Hornets flew the majority of Navy strike sorties. They hit oil refineries that funded the caliphate. They destroyed vehicle-borne improvised explosive device factories. They struck command nodes, training camps, and logistics depots across Iraq and Syria. The Super Hornet's weapons configuration for anti-ISIS operations typically included a centerline fuel tank for extended range, 2 wing-mounted GBU-38 JDAM precision bombs, an ATFLIR targeting pod on the port cheek station, 2 AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles for self-defense, and either a pair of AIM-120 AMRAAMs or an additional pair of GBU-12 paveway bombs on the outer wing stations. The tempo was relentless. Carrier air wings deployed on 7-month cycles, with Super Hornet squadrons flying 2 to 3 combat sorties per aircraft per day. Crews would launch before dawn, fly 4 to 5 hours over Iraq or Syria, return, rearm, sleep for 6 hours, and do it again. Some pilots logged over 200 combat missions in a single deployment. One particularly intense day in October 2016 during the Battle of Mosul, Super Hornets from FA-18 flew 16 consecutive sorties in 24 hours, delivering over 30 precision-guided munitions on Islamic State positions inside the city. The ground controller reported that the strikes destroyed 3 suicide vehicle factories and killed an estimated 40 fighters preparing for a counterattack. The wear on airframes was severe. Super Hornets were exceeding their planned flight hour budgets by 30 to 40%. Maintenance crews on the carriers worked around the clock, 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat on the flight deck, replacing engines, patching airframes, and turning aircraft around in under 2 hours. The jet's designed maintainability paid dividends here. The Super Hornet required fewer maintenance hours per flight hour than any other tactical aircraft in the fleet. That margin kept the jets flying when the operational tempo would have grounded anything else. The Islamic State campaign proved the Super Hornet's endurance. But one mission during that war would make international headlines and demonstrate that this jet could still dogfight. June 18, 2017. Syrian Air Force Su-22 fighter attacked Syrian Democratic Forces near the town of Jaydin, south of Tabqa. American Special Operations advisors were embedded with those ground troops. The order went out: stop the Syrian jet. Lieutenant Commander Michael Tremmel of VFA-87 was flying a combat air patrol aboard his Super Hornet over northern Syria. He received the call. The Syrian ground attack aircraft was actively bombing American allied forces. Rules of engagement were clear. He was authorized to engage. Tremmel's wingman attempted first. He fired an AIM-9X Sidewinder at the Su-22. The missile tracked but was defeated by a combination of decoy flares and the Su-22's maneuvering. The Syrian pilot did not break off the attack. The AIM-9X Block II Sidewinder is the most advanced short-range air-to-air missile in the American arsenal. It features a focal plane array infrared seeker with a 180-degree off-bore sight targeting capability, thrust vectoring control for extreme maneuverability, and resistance to conventional infrared countermeasures. The fact that the Su-22 defeated the first shot with flares was considered an anomaly. The missile may have locked onto a flare rather than the aircraft's engine exhaust. Tremmel closed to weapons range and fired an AIM-120 AMRAAM. The radar-guided missile tracked perfectly. The Su-22 exploded. The Syrian pilot ejected and was recovered by regime forces. It was the first American air-to-air kill since 1999, the first by a Super Hornet, and the first by a Navy pilot in over 18 years. The engagement lasted approximately 8 minutes from initial contact to kill confirmation. It was brief, violent, and decisive. The kill silenced a persistent criticism that the Super Hornet was too heavy and too slow for air combat maneuvering. Tremmel had demonstrated that in a real engagement, tactics, sensors, and weapons employment mattered more than airshow agility. The Super Hornet did not need to outturn the Su-22, it needed to outthink it. And it did. But the Super Hornet's war was not over. A new threat was emerging in the Red Sea. January 2024. Houthi rebels in Yemen began launching anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and one-way attack drones at commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Global trade was under direct attack. The Suez Canal, through which 12% of world trade flows, was becoming a no-go zone. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier strike group repositioned into the Red Sea. Operation Prosperity Guardian launched to protect commercial shipping. Super Hornets were at the center of the response. The mission was unlike anything the jet had faced before. The Houthis were launching Iranian-designed weapons from mobile launchers hidden in Yemen's mountainous terrain. The threat was persistent, multiple launches per week, sometimes per day. And the targets were not military positions but cargo ships and oil tankers. Super Hornets flew defensive counter-air patrols over the Red Sea, scanning for inbound cruise missiles and drones. When contacts appeared on radar, the crews engaged with AIM-120 missiles, shooting down anti-ship cruise missiles in flight. This was a mission set that had been practiced in training for decades but never executed in combat. Intercepting a sea-skimming anti-ship cruise missile requires detecting the threat at maximum radar range, often under 40 nautical miles due to the missile's low-altitude profile, and engaging before it reaches its terminal maneuver phase. The Super Hornet's APG-79 radar can track low-altitude targets against sea clutter, but the engagement window is compressed. Pilots have seconds to classify the contact, verify it is hostile, and fire. Simultaneously, other Super Hornets struck Houthi launch sites and weapons storage facilities inside Yemen. They dropped JDAM bombs on underground missile bunkers. They fired precision munitions at mobile launcher vehicles caught by intelligence assets during pre-launch setup. Over a 3-month period, Super Hornets from the Eisenhower's air wing shot down multiple Houthi cruise missiles and drones, struck dozens of ground targets, and flew over 1,600 combat sorties. The operational tempo exceeded anything the air wing had experienced, including the anti-Islamic State campaign. Pilots reported flying 20 to 25 hours per week in sustained combat operations. The Eisenhower's deployment became the longest combat deployment for a carrier strike group in decades. Crews spent over 9 months at sea without a port call. The physical and psychological toll was immense, but the Super Hornet never stopped flying. Every night, jets launched into the darkness over the Red Sea hunted for threats, and returned to a pitching deck in the middle of the night. The cycle repeated every single day for months. The Red Sea campaign demonstrated the Super Hornet's relevance in a new era of warfare, one defined not by pure state air combat but by persistent, distributed threats from non-state actors armed with advanced weapons. A jet that was designed to fight the Soviet Union proved it could fight the wars of the 21st century. From the no-fly zones of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the opening shock of Iraqi freedom to the skies above Libya, from the grinding war against the Islamic State to shooting down a Syrian fighter jet to defending global shipping in the Red Sea, the FA-18 Super Hornet has been there for every fight, every mission, every call. It was supposed to be a placeholder, a bridge to the next generation. Instead, it became the most combat-proven multi-role fighter in American naval aviation history. Over 30 years of continuous operations. 0 air-to-air losses. And it is still flying tonight, somewhere over a dark ocean loaded for whatever comes next. If this is your first time here, subscribe and hit the notification bell. There is a lot more coming. And if you want to see how another legendary weapon earned its reputation, check the video on screen now.